Hello again, it's Roland Zimmermann from King's Court Estate Winery. Welcome to another video in our series of videos. Today I'm going to talk to you about the legend of King's Court Estate Winery and how we came to serve royalty still to this day. For those of you that are not familiar with this story, the story begins back in the 1790s or the 1700s when the taxes needed to be paid. Now, going back to that far, taxes weren't paid the way that they are today. You didn't send in a check, so to speak, to the local tax office. In fact, local tax offices didn't even exist. The way that peasants at that time had to pay their taxes was through something called a tilth. Now, for those of you that are not familiar with tilths, they are basically agricultural produce that you give to the Kaiser or the king or royalty that is supervisor or the controller of your particular life, but also your particular chateaux and the fact that you are able to reside theoretically peacefully in their particular domain. So the story begins when my great-great-great-great-great-grandfather needed to pay his yearly taxes. Now, the taxes were collected by the king or Kaiser in this particular case coming to hold court in your local village. So they would usually set up their entire entourage in the town square, little space like that. And of course, while they're there, they need to be fed, they need to be entertained, and of course, they want to drink. So what does my uncle do, or my great-great-grandfather do? Well, he ended up rolling a barrel of his newest vintage Riesling into the town square to pay his portion of the tilth. When he actually served it to the king or Kaiser, the Kaiser was so impressed with the quality of the wine that he immediately decreed that from that day forward, the Zimmermann family will no longer pay in the form of cows, pigs, chickens, or any other agricultural produce except the newest barrel of wine every year delivered to the king's residence. That's the gist of the legend on how we came to serve royalty, because for a number of years that did actually continue to happen until the Kaiser or the king had passed. Now, to this day, that family estate, that original family homestead, is still run by my cousin, who is also a seventh-generation winemaker in the family, and he still provides a lot of wine to a number of nobles in the European community. And it is a very proud feature that we are able to still hold true to this particular legend to this day. Fast forward a little bit from the 1790s to a bit more modern day, where my father, the youngest of three boys, was seeking some adventure, some new exciting life for himself, and opted to emigrate to Canada. He ended up initially landing in British Columbia and working for one of the largest wineries in Canada at the time, named Jordan and St. Michel Cellars. For the older viewers, that might be a name that's familiar to you. For the newer ones, please bear with me. The younger ones, please bear with me. I'll get to the point in just a second. After landing in British Columbia, through a number of years of hard work and eventual promotions that he received, he was promoted to the national director of winemaking operations for Jordan and St. Michel Cellars, which of course meant he had to move to Ontario. So he packed up his whole young family, including myself, and moved everybody to Ontario from beautiful British Columbia. Miss you, BC. And the story doesn't end there, obviously. After he moved to Ontario, he was a director for a number of years of winemaking operations. But due to the difficult economic circumstances in the 80s that many of the older viewers may remember, companies would change hands very frequently, and there were a lot of challenges in terms of maintaining employment. So he decided to go out on his own, and in 1988 purchased his first parcel of vineyards. Now, this was a vineyard that was in full production at the time, and a little bit smaller than what it is today, but needless to say, those grapes were under contract, and he ended up continuing to run these grapes to various different wineries here in Niagara for a few years. Come around in the early 90s, an opportunity presented itself to buy another adjacent farm a few roads over. That is the current location of Kings Court Estate Winery, named at 2083 7th Street. This location has been our main base of operations now for the better part of 35 years. Now, you may ask, well, what does the original family homestead have to do with Kings Court here in Canada? Well, it's in the name. You see, my great-great-grandfather, he was a bit of an ingenious marketer. He decided that, you know what, Zimmermann Winery ain't gonna cut it now that we're serving royalty. So he ended up changing the name to Königsvinget. The closest approximation to the meaning in English to this particular phrase is purveyor of the king's wine. Now, obviously, king's wine doesn't sound terribly great as a winery, so we added in the portion of court, so King's Court Estate Winery, to give it just that a little bit better presentation. Now, some of you may ask, well, what does all that story involve with me? Well, being the eldest son, I originally wanted absolutely nothing to do with farming. I can tell you that I spent many a summer in the vineyards wishing I was anywhere but playing with my friends, for example. Now, when I graduated high school, I ran as far away as possible from the farm and immediately realized after a short period of time that, you know what, I actually really liked and enjoyed a lot of the constant different requirements, different aspects of farming versus what this potential career direction was that I thought would suit me well. So I decided after a year that, you know what, I'm going to come back. Now, keep in mind that this was about late 90s, and in Canada at the time, a professional or post-secondary school for winemaking didn't really exist in a capacity that my forefathers had been used to from being trained in Europe. So what did my dad do? He packaged me up, put me on a plane with a suitcase and said, you're going to your uncle's. So I ended up landing in Europe and spending what is referred to in industry terms a vintage, which means you basically work like a slave during harvest to make sure the grapes are harvested, for 1 year at my uncle's facility. Now keep in mind that in the time that I was sent there, the operation here at Kings Court was just in its fledgling stage. So I didn't really, as a 20-year-old, have much of an idea of like, oh, this is what it's gonna look like if it keeps going. So my uncle's place was a very big eye-opener for myself. And I learned so much that first year that I ended up staying for almost an entire decade in Europe, traveling through many different countries, working in many different countries under many different winemakers, and picking up stuff like a sponge, trying to understand as much as possible about European wine growing techniques. In 2005, my time in Europe came to an end, and I decided to come back home and help my father with the continued growing of Kings Court Estate Winery. That takes us to the present day. Thank you very much for watching. We very much appreciate it. We'd love to see your comments down below, and definitely give us some likes. Cheers, and talk to you again soon.